AI is moving from answering questions to taking action. And as it spreads, control is becoming the next big fight.
Agents are like teenagers. They're supremely intelligent. They have no fear of any kind of consequence. And if you don't put enough guardrails around them, sometimes they might do things that you don't want them to do.
There's really a phrase we are seeing is scaling into bankruptcy.
The United States deployed 1/10 the number of robots that China did last year.
You could get a bill for $50,000 when you thought it was going to be a $20 task.
And we, as a country, we've always led these big changes, and we've always been the owner of the next new platform. And I think it's essential if you want to be a world power that you own those things.
Control over what AI does, over what it costs, and in robotics, control over the industries it's about to reshape. Here's that full conversation. Hi everyone, it is Thursday, July 30th, and the biggest story in AI this week, it's not a new model, it's that once again, money is starting to matter. Since ChatGPT launched, the industry has operated on a pretty generous assumption. Spend whatever it takes now, and the returns will come later. But every so often, the market tests that assumption, asks whether revenue is catching up, whether demand is real, whether all that infrastructure will actually earn a return, what kind of return. That is what we're watching play out again now. A few of the mega caps have reported so far this earnings season, and the message is fairly simple. Google showed growth, but was punished for the cost. Microsoft was rewarded for showing clearer AI monetization. Meta was punished because the return on its spending remains harder to see. So the AI trade is volatile these days. Nothing captures that better than what just happened to Leopold Aschenbrenner. If you don't know Leopold, he is the former OpenAI researcher who wrote Situational Awareness, basically the definitive super bull case that AI progress is about to go vertical. He then built a hedge fund around that worldview, and it reportedly grew to more than $20 billion in just about 2 years. Today, we learned that after getting hammered in the recent AI sell-off, the fund sold its public stock portfolio to Citadel. The Financial Times puts that book at roughly $16 billion and called it one of the largest rushed stock transactions in Wall Street history. Now, Situational Awareness is holding on to its private investments, including an Anthropic stake, but the public trade is now in Ken Griffin and Citadel's hands. And in a nice bit of timing, chip stocks, they are ripping today. That could change tomorrow. But more importantly, it shows why the Citadel sale doesn't settle anything about the underlying AI thesis. It may tell us more about leverage, timing, liquidity. You can be right about where the technology is going and still get forced out of the trade before it gets there. At the same time, Jeetu Patel has been making an interesting point about the chips themselves. A lot of the bearish AI math assumes that these GPUs, they age like iPhones. NVIDIA releases a new generation, the old one becomes less useful, and big tech has to start replacing hundreds of billions of dollars in hardware. That may be true still, but Jeetu argues that the software running on those chips keeps improving. So the same NVIDIA GPU can run a better model today than it could, say, a year ago. Inference gets more efficient. The output gets more useful. The cost of completing a task comes down. So the hardware may get older while its earning power goes up, and that is the bull case, essentially a super cycle. But the money around this is getting a little more complicated. NVIDIA may help finance OpenAI's data centers and the NVIDIA chips inside them. And today, OpenAI cut the price of two new models, one by 20%, the other by 80%, just 3 weeks after launch. That could mean the cost curve is working, could also mean customers are pushing back and pricing power is getting weaker. So the question isn't whether AI is real, it's whether the returns can arrive before investors and customers lose their patience. Is AI's easy money era ending? To get past the stock charts and into what is actually happening underneath the AI trade, we are joined by three people building at different parts of the stack. We've got Cisco's Jeetu Patel right beside me on the OpenAI Rogue Agent, AI security, and whether autonomous systems need a kill switch. We've also got Fireworks AI CEO Lin Qiao on OpenAI's price cuts, the model price war, and whether open models have an advantage as customers focused on cost. And then finally, we're going to talk to Standard Bot CEO Evan Beard on new restrictions targeting Chinese robot imports and what they could mean for the cost of automating American factories. Let's start with Jeetu. Welcome. I love how you're willing to come into the studio. It's great to have this.
I've actually been in San Francisco 3 days in a row. It's kind of, I think I should like move here or something.
Because everything's happening.
All the alpha is happening in SF.
I mean, I've been on vacation for the last 2 weeks, and I, can't stop.
I know. How was it? Did you have a fun time?
It was great, but I'm happy to be
I
back.
think X missed you.
2 weeks in AI is like 2 years.
Yeah.
I'm stealing that from someone, I can't remember who, but that's what it feels like.
Do you feel completely out of touch?
Totally. And so you're here to help me get back in touch. But
open source happened.
Open source happened huge. Broke out into the open, although, we've been talking about it forever. And it feels like this sort of, it's always here, the bull-bear debate, but where are we? That's like where I'd like to start in the AI cycle right now. I mentioned Dwarkesh. I could see you kind of nodding along. Did I represent sort of his argument
Yeah, there was
accurately?
one piece that was actually, we'll talk about Dwarkesh in a second, but if you take a step back and say what is actually happening, there's not that much that in my mind changes in the macro picture, in the sense that there is a secular shift. Secular shifts will have constant levels of ups and downs, from week to week. But the fundamental assumptions of the fact that AI actually will help us solve problems that we couldn't think of solving before AI, I think still remains. And so I tend to not get super kind of fixated on what the weekly movements are, and I actually focus more on what are the big kind of shifts that are occurring in intelligence, and how can we make sure that we continue to keep taking advantage of them. And so that to me is exciting. Now, what Dwarkesh talked about is, by the way, that boy has a lot of alpha. He's like, he's very, very bright. And one of the things that he brought up, which was very cool, was this, and this is an important thing. I've actually talked about it quite a bit, which is your, specifically with chips. This is the first time that we've seen where these chips continue to keep, having longer and longer shelf lives as you actually see the compression of time for a new chip getting developed, which is very counterintuitive, because usually if it takes your chip development cycle goes down, you would think so would your useful use of that chip and the lifetime value of the chip go down. But no, that actually tends to go up. And because we are in a constrained environment, that actually will continue in the, for the foreseeable future.
And that's essentially the super cycle that people have talked about, and Dwarkesh put it really well.
Yeah.
But let me push back on that a little bit. I remember Jasmine and I did a story a while ago about, the data centers that Oracle was building. And I know we're constrained right now, so someone will always kind of be behind you in line, willing to take on that compute capacity. But if you're OpenAI or Anthropic, if you're Frontier Lab and you want the very, very, very best, will you still take those older chips?
Actually, for different use cases, you might have different chips. So when you actually go into inferencing, not everyone uses the top tier frontier class model for every query. And so you might, in order to go out and serve up things which are pretty, regular requests, you might need to have chips that are actually, an H100 chip today costs a lot more than H100 chip cost when it actually got released. And that is his whole point, which is the lifetime value of the chip is going to go longer, because what you'll have is you'll have the consistent amount of degraduation to a lighter workload as newer chips come up. And so training might happen on the fastest chips, but then you'll have the next level of chips that you'll have. And now you've actually started seeing, I don't know if you know the stat, but 60% of all compute volume now has gone to inferencing, which is actually a very interesting,
which is going to grow, right?
Which is only going to grow. It's not going to go the other direction.
Yeah.
It's only going to get bigger and bigger. But you'll still need tremendous amount of high-powered chips for training, and on average, training a frontier class model is about $3 to $5 billion, and that's only going to get higher over time as that happens. So I do feel like there's what Dwarkesh is talking about is, if everyone takes if the larger frontier models are far better at extracting value from a chip than every other company, does that actually then create too much concentration with just the frontier models? And will every one of us, will the rest of us be able to even have access to chips because of such a compute shortage?
Okay, so a few questions on the back of that. One is demand. Let's get to that in a second, because that assumes demand is just going to keep going up and up, which I know you kind of feel passionately and you have a good view of what's happening. But actually, this is a good question from one of our viewers, Carson, who's always tuning in. Don't you need to account for power efficiency of the older versus newer chips in supposing how valuable they are? Or does the software help on that side also?
I think software helps. So the point over here is not that you have a finite number of chips in the world. If you have a finite number of chips and you don't need the fastest chip for something, you're going to use every chip that you have so you can serve up a workload. And right now, the inference volume is going up so much, and we're sub 1% of humanity using agents right now. So imagine as that thing starts to kind of pick up.
That's getting at the demand question.
That gets to the demand question. Like I don't see the level of fluctuation, because it's such an early phase that these things are going to be secular shifts that are going to have very long cycles.
Right. Jeetu, I know you're in a quiet period, so I should have said that at the beginning. So you can't answer anything specifics about financials, but I do wonder, like, if you can talk about it in a broad sense, spending, right? I talked a little bit about this. Every once in a while, markets get nervous about how much companies are spending versus how much they're returning. And the idea about the chips being useful for longer, does that ultimately help the companies that are spending a ton of money on infrastructures and watching their free cash flow
I think go
to zero?
The germane point to take from Dwarkesh's blog, in my mind, is that the efficiency gains that are starting to happen in the way that these frontier models are starting to use compute is actually very interesting. And what that's doing is extending the life of chips. And because of that extension of life of chips, you're now going to see a fair amount of kind of increase in the cost of chips on an ongoing basis. And that might then create a scarcity for everyone else who's not actually got the same level of extraction capacity from a flop of compute.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's turn a little bit, because there's lots to talk to you about. Open source. I like how you said, like, so much has happened in the last few weeks.
Yep.
How do you feel about it right now? Is it fair to say the industry has now coalesced behind open source? Obviously, there's sort of one major holdout. What does it mean for AI going forward?
Look, I think it's there's a few things that are probably worth thinking about in open source. The first one is, firstly, K3 was a near frontier class model when you start thinking about like what it was able to do with open source, and that's the first time that you've actually started to see this level of momentum.
That's Moonshot's Kimi K3, the
Kimi
latest
K3.
sort of big capable model out of China.
And so now what you're starting to have is a tremendous amount of chatter in the market saying, hey, so what does this mean? Like, is this going to disrupt closed source models? I actually think there's going to be room for closed source models and there's going to be room for open source models. Then the question becomes, should we actually not allow those open source models to be within the US? And this actually, you have to take a step back because they're so nuanced that I don't think there's a simple answer. There's pros and cons to it. So if you don't allow for an open source model to be in the US and they proliferate in the rest of the world, the cost of intelligence in the U.S. goes up compared to the rest of the world. That would not be good for America.
Would that equal less adoption potentially?
That would equal less adoption, but I'm not sure if it would equal less adoption, but it would increase our cost of intelligence compared to someone else, so our competitiveness would go down compared to everyone else in the world. On the other hand, if you allow it, and if these open source models have an ability to go out and do things that could cause harm to our critical infrastructure, that's not something you should take lightly either. So I think policy setting is going to be particularly complex in this time period.
Does Washington have the right people to look at this?
Yes. I actually feel like the level of maturity that Washington has shown right now and the amount of thoughtfulness that goes into making decisions, I'm very impressed.
Does it need to be someone who has a
background? By the way,
background?
it's not just Washington. I think governments across the board that I talk to throughout the world, they tend to be pretty kind of dexterous on the use of AI.
Do you need someone like a David Sachs who has a long history in technology, who can advocate for something based on his experience, or do you need people in commerce and trade?
You need both. You need both. I think you need to have people like David Sachs who can who can distill it down for people in very good ways. But then you also need to have policymakers that know how to go out and have policy get actually implemented, executed, and enforced.
Okay, last topic I want to hit with you. I know you've been watching this obviously so closely, is the OpenAI rogue agent. It's been so fascinating to watch. Basically, it broke out of testing, right? Yep. First attacked Hugging Face. Hugging Face basically had to use a Chinese model to contain it because the Frontier closed model wouldn't do what it wanted. And then we got reports this week of a second sort of hack. Is that what I can call it?
Yep. And so you described it extremely well. Here's the really, really big thing that you have to keep in mind is the structural shift that's happening is as agents get more and more prolific, the difference between whether or not something is happening because it's a security breach or because the agent just misbehaved or thought it was a good idea is getting harder and harder to distinguish. So security and observability will actually fuse more and more together, And so if you think about, imagine an agent deletes 10,000 emails. You don't know today if that was because the agent thought it was a good idea or because there was a coordinated attack because of which 10,000 emails got deleted.
Wow.
And that's the thing that we have to now start thinking about. Is it's not as simple as this is a security breach versus this is something that was a behavioral kind of drift in an agent. Those have to start. Those start coming together, and they become very, very hard to identify and distinguish one from the other.
So the idea, like, you don't know if the agent just thought it was a good idea to delete all these emails, or someone actually went in and ordered it to do so.
Like, if you think about what happened in OpenAI, all that was done was the agent was given a goal /goal, go out and do well in this eval.
Yeah.
Right?
To your best judgment.
To your best judgment. The best judgment, the way I think about this is agents are like teenagers. They're supremely intelligent. They have no fear of any kind of consequence. And, if you don't put enough guardrails around them, sometimes they might do things that you don't want them to do. And having that happen in a completely unpredictable, autonomous way is something that we all have to make sure that we think through in a really kind of thoughtful manner.
A teenager, you may not be able to control. I mean, you can take the car keys away, you can cut off their...
Imagine a 12-year-old who's never driven a car and you've got a Formula One car that's sitting out there and they just take it because you said, get from point A to point B, and they said, the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to get in the Formula One car.
I mean, that is a very scary scenario to be looking at.
This is what's happening now. It's like, these agents are getting a mind of their own, and so we have to make sure that we put enough guardrails around them.
So what do you do? I mean, there's been more talk about a kill switch. Is that even possible?
I think you have to have an extreme amount of observability on the behavior of agents when the agent is starting to show drift. And when it does start to show drift, can you dynamically at runtime enforce guardrails so that the agent doesn't go out and do things you don't want it to do? That's number one. There's another area that people also look at, which is this could become a massive cost overrun. If an agent decides they're just going to keep going out and spinning up thousands of other agents.
And trying every single route.
You could get a bill for $50,000 when you thought it was going to be a $20 task. And so that requires very sophisticated tokenomics that have to be put in place that say, is the agent in fact performing things the way that you want it to perform? And if it's starting to go beyond those boundary conditions, can you intercept that effectively enough and fast enough?
Are you confident we can?
I mean, we're doing a lot. We're doing a lot to make sure that happens. I feel like you will, with security and with safety, you can never eliminate the risk. You can only mitigate it. And so, yes, I'm confident that over time we'll get better and better and better. And I'm also confident over time that agents get better and better and better. So I think you have to make sure that you're keeping a very close eye on it.
To sort of put a bow on it then, I mean, when we talk about open source, some of the biggest critics of open source say that it's dangerous, it's not secure, but do you need an open source model as much as you do closed source or even more to be able to contain some of this stuff?
I think if defenses aren't machine scale and the attacks are machine scale, it's going to be really bad. In fact, here's an interesting part. All the Hugging Face defenses that needed to happen, the closed source models didn't end up working because the guardrails were confusing the actual adversarial attack or the bad behavior with someone actually doing an adversarial attack. So the guardrails were working over time. So an open source model was really necessary at the time. So like I feel like there's going to be a world for open source, there's going to be a world for closed source, and I'll leave you with this. There's 3 dimensions that are really important with models. It's not just intelligence, it's intelligence, cost, and control. You have to have the right level of intelligence for the job getting done. You have to make sure that you maintain a certain set of boundary conditions on costs, and you want to make sure that for certain things you have enough control. Open source gives you that control in a far better way than a closed source model does.
Right.
But here's the thing I think we should have is there's no doubt in my mind that as we go through this open source movement, unequivocally, the United States should make sure that we have the world's best frontier class open source models. We should make sure that we're continuing to go out and have that pursuit very active within the U.S.
Who's going to do that? Is it all on NVIDIA, or do you think there's going to
I
be?
think NVIDIA is doing a great job. Mira Murati has, she launched a close to a trillion parameter model with 41 million active parameters that can be activated at any point in time.
Reflection, we're waiting.
I think there's going to be a bunch of different players that will actually get in. And what you want to have happen when that happens is the frontier class models, you want to make sure that they don't get discouraged from building the next model either, because their business model is on
depends on the frontier.
And if we stop and stagnate because every model got built because of distillation of an existing model, then what ends up happening is you will find that you'll have a ceiling that you've reached on improvements of the AI models, which would be bad because we're nowhere near where we need to be, so that we can actually finish the last mile. AI is still pretty bad on the last mile.
I have about a million other questions. We've run out of time, but I know you'll come back, and we always
Anytime.
continue our discussion.
It's so good to see you.
We're always talking about this stuff. Jeetu, thank you so much. It was
Thanks
great
for
to have
having
you
me.
in person. We'll talk to you very soon. It's good. Now, we've been talking about whether companies can trust these agents. The next piece is whether they can afford them. Jeetu just talked about tokenomics and how this is becoming incredibly complicated. OpenAI gave us a pretty clear sign today that cost is becoming a bigger part of this fight. It cut the price of GPT-5 Terra by 20% and Luna by 80% just 3 weeks after launching them. That comes as companies take a harder look at their AI bills and cheaper open weight models become more competitive. Our next guest sits right in the middle of that shift. Lin Qiao is the co-founder and CEO of Fireworks AI. Lin, it's great to have you. First time on the show, so thank you.
Thanks for having me. Super excited to be here.
G2 kind of started the conversation by saying, when I was gone vacation for the last 2 weeks, open source exploded into the open. People got familiar with Fireworks AI. Maybe just start by explaining like where Fireworks sits in the space and what your purpose is. And where we are just in this sort of evolution of where AI is going.
Right. So Fireworks, we as a company exist by following this deep mission of building specialized intelligence. So this is a very different strategy, as in we went back to the root of why any company exists. Every single company exists for a reason, because they focus on solving a unique problem in a special way extremely well. As AI is disrupting many areas of development, for example, software engineering has been deeply disrupted, it significantly collapsed the resource and timeline from ideation to a full-blown production scale. And then the question shifted from where's the moat? Is that in the application itself, or it goes back to intelligence itself? But I think there's a great point that the company should continue to exist by owning their own intelligence. It's not either or. The value capturing shouldn't be either it's in application itself or in the intelligence layer. It should be the marriage of both. So as a company, we see the opportunity that every single company exists for a reason, and they should own their intelligence to continue to thrive and build a great diversified ecosystem. And we give tools to every single company to customize models, customize deployment, maximize token efficiency, and keep the IP. So that's what we do.
I feel like since the beginning, for a few years now, we've heard that, your data is your moat. But at the same time, there was still such a learning curve. Like a lot of companies, enterprises that didn't even operate in tech or the AI space, they wanted the most trustworthy and the best AI, and that was OpenAI or Anthropic's models, right? But we've seen a real shift over the last few weeks and months. Just as you're saying, protect your data. You don't want to necessarily give that away. That's what Fireworks helps you do, right? have you seen more outreach? Like, what has the last few weeks been like for you as a company when enterprises start to realize, oh, we can actually get like near frontier intelligence at a cheaper rate plus protect our data?
Right. So actually, that shift has started from last year.
From last year.
So Cursor is one of our biggest customer.
Cursor? But
Right.
they're an AI company.
They're a company, absolutely. But they are on the cutting edge of activating their data and turn that into specialized intelligence.
Right.
And
They were really, sorry, just a second. They were so smart because they actually they were early to stop relying on the frontier models. They took a Chinese model and built on top of it, right?
they build on top of the best model they can. I think that's the logical reasoning, because when you customize and specialize intelligence, you want to build on top of the highest base IQ, and push the quality. So quality is not compromisable. Push the quality to the frontier, and then you can decide, hey, maybe that model's too big. Then I want to shrink it down to a lot more economical. So as the industry is also, I think, starting from this year, we see a big shift of industry from token maxing
Yeah.
to value maxing. And that's a big shift because at the end, we all need to answer one question: what is the ROI? And the R part of the ROI is the most important. So just by
return.
consuming tokens doesn't mean it is delivering the value at the most efficient way. And that's every single company is considering that. Ask themselves deeply that question, especially if it is existential for the company's future durability, as your company is deeply, your future destiny deeply baked in whether you can really scale your business built on top of AI. And there's really a phrase we are seeing is scaling into bankruptcy. This is such a unique phenomenon in the AI era that is fundamentally different from traditional SaaS era, because at the SaaS era, product market fit and the durable business, they are one thing. Once you hit product market fit, you scale as fast as possible into building a vibrant business, because the costs of operation is mostly centered on people and infrastructure like storage, CPU, which is actually very low cost, and those are commodity. And now scaling business on AI is mostly centralized GPUs and other AI infrastructure pieces. It is quite costly. So and if you're not getting it right, you can have a big customer base, but it's gonna take away all your cash flow. And it is a universal phenomenon that's happening. Interesting, across small companies, startups, they cannot scale because they're going to scale into bankruptcy, run out money. But even worse for incumbents, because they have huge amount of customer base, huge amount of traffic, and they couldn't unleash their AI features to all their customer base because they cannot afford that.
Scaling into bankruptcy, that's so interesting. I've never heard that before. I feel like that's an updated take on like what has been common knowledge here in Silicon Valley, which is blitz scaling, right? We've talked about blitz scaling during the easy money era of what, like 2015 to the next like 7 or 8 years. And the first phase of sort of this modern AI era has been, if you don't use AI enough, you're going to go bankrupt. But that has actually changed, like that's flipped. Are people talking about scaling into bankruptcy? I've never heard it before you mentioned it.
Yeah, so we have so many customers. They, obviously our segment covers AI native startups, digital native, and the big enterprises. And the token consumption from end of last year started to seriously climb up. And we're seeing super linear demand because AI is really getting to production. It's no longer experimentation, tinkling, kicking the tire. All sorts of companies are really bringing AI into their critical paths of production traffic. And then becomes a serious question is, can we sustain the cost of operating full-blown AI while delivering value to the customer? And it doesn't contradict with product market fit, as in whether we see so many, like last year was the year of coding, and this is the year of co-work. There are general purpose co-work for general purpose professional support, doing all sorts of deep research, slide deck generation, but also verticalize the co-work across a wide variety of areas from finance, legal, marketing, recruiting, sales, customer support, you name it. And those are real usage, real end user impact.
Right.
And the traffic is enormous. And then it becomes an issue.
So you're saying it went from like software engineers last year to more general business units within a company.
Absolutely.
That's interesting. And I know that you guys just raised a round. Are you guys moving up in terms of the enterprises that you're going after? Startups have to worry about scaling into bankruptcy, but big public companies have to worry about earnings and their balance sheet. So have you seen a change? And it's always interesting because whenever I ask big companies what they're using for the last few years, always OpenAI or Anthropic, even though you can use the open source models and that, but hosting them, actually using them can be difficult, right? Are you seeing that shift? It's not like you just turn it on.
Yeah, we're seeing an active shift of seeking more control. Whether it's a startup or enterprise, they're seeking more control of customization, because, as I mentioned, every single company exists for a unique reason. There's deep, specialized knowledge, taste, judgment encoded in their product, encoded in the data they possess uniquely as their proprietary IP. And if you think about that, intelligence is the derivative of data. Majority of those data is actually private data locked inside those application enterprises, will never be shared to solve a common task. And today, those private data was not being activated into intelligence. And you think about that's very interesting gap that we should be addressing, is turn private data into specialized intelligence. And that's where we believe the future lies. And the future will be millions of specialized, customized model, one per application per use case.
So if I am sort of a large CFO or CTO at a non-tech company, say like a Walmart or Starbucks, are they starting to use specialized models, lean more on open source? How can they do that securely? By working with the Fireworks, by just getting it through AWS or Google Cloud or Azure?
Yeah, so I think Walmart, for example, they actually are not new to AI.
Yeah.
So AI has two phases, pre-Gen AI, post-Gen AI. So Gen AI create this notion of foundation model where you can build on top of. And the pre-Gen AI, there's no foundation model. Everyone working on AI has to train from scratch. There's no model you can build on top of. So then Walmart actually investing in AI for a long time, where they collect, they curate data from scratch and solve very different kind of AI problem. I believe they're also aggressively shifting towards the Gen AI post-training. And that's a company I deeply respect, and they have deep roots in early stage of the AI development.
Walmart has been incredibly ahead in terms of a lot of different technological fronts. I guess maybe some of the other ones that haven't, but also let me ask you, because Fireworks signed the open letter that Jensen Huang posted on open source. You guys have been advocating for open source. Washington, do you feel like they have taken a position? What position should they be taking? What should Washington and the Trump administration be doing to make sure that America leads on AI?
Yeah, so that's such a deep and interesting topic. I personally have a very good conversation with the government, and I understand the complexity.
Were you in Washington this week?
We were not. I was not personally there. It was over VC. So I think it anchored on cybersecurity. And the concern is how we navigate, how we learn. This is such a new phenomenon, how we learn together as a community. And one thing I'm very happy walking away from that conversation is they're open to have this discussion. They're trying to learn what are the choices we can make and what are the design space we think about. The complexity here is, are we sufficiently protect our current system from all sorts of attack, right? So it goes back to the root of cybersecurity. It's not a new problem. And then what's the best way to get out of this? So I think part of the reason we signed an open letter is we do, and it's inspired by information. Obviously, we talk a lot about Hugging Face and OpenAI incident. Inspired by what's happening, and we deeply believe having the community be able to have a tool to deeply bake into continuous develop the defense mechanism to make the defense much more sophisticated than the way to attack is the solution. And that just means we need to let people collaboratively work on the defense mechanism, and open source typically is the vehicle to get there. And the open weights model is part of the tools to get there. And that's why we think kind of developing the open is a way to approach this problem.
And we just had a real world example of that, right, with the OpenAI rogue agent and Hugging Face, which Jeetu talked a little bit about. Finally, what's your position on distillation? It has sort of just broken into the open. Obviously, this is something that has been used in technology for many, many years. It feels like it'd almost be better to call it like terms of service breach versus distillation. But what do you think about, for example, the argument that Anthropic is making as sort of the only major lab holding out in this open source advocacy?
Yeah, so as you can see that as a debate unveil, it is very interesting to see all the industry, different companies all united together as an alliance to say, hey, we should think openly about that, and it's almost like all the rest of the company versus Anthropic. I think that just I'm very happily surprised to and kind of be part of this conversation is we should absolutely respect IP. But we should also be fair in terms of, hey, what is real fair use of accessing APIs, and how to define that crisply that allow the whole entire economy to have diversified solution. I do not believe AI being controlled by one company is the solution. It's such a powerful tool, and it's too powerful to not have everyone else have access to it. So that's our opinion.
Yeah, well said. Where I ended with Jeetu too, do you think that sort of this push and all of the support for open source will speed up having real American open source champions?
Absolutely, yes. I do not think there's any fundamental reason U.S. will not have our best open source models in the world.
Who will that be, do you think?
I think jury is still out, because I know many big parties are actively working on that. Obviously, we know Nemotron, NVIDIA, but there are many parties also deeply thinking about it.
Right. Well, Lin, it's great to get your insights on a range of topics. Congratulations on the latest fundraise, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Lin. That was Fireworks CEO and co-founder. Now, if intelligence keeps getting cheaper, more of it is going to move out of software and into the physical world. We've been talking about it. That's where we're going next in this live stream. The FCC has moved to block new foreign-made robot models from entering the U.S. market, and a move largely aimed at China. Previously approved models can still be sold. Supporters say that the restrictions address real security risks and give American robot makers room to grow. But Chinese companies, they currently have a major advantage in cost and scale. Blocking their newest machines, that could also make it more expensive for American factories to automate. Evan Beard is the co-founder and CEO of Standard Bots. Evan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Give us a lay of the land. I have my own opinions. Where is China versus U.S. in the robot race?
So right now, the United States deployed 1/10 the number of robots that China did last year. China deployed about 300,000, and we were closer to 30,000. So they're way ahead of us in terms of robotics. And if you look at the supply chain, it's even more striking. Like they make motors, they make gear units, they make all the components that go in the robot, and we're still quite nascent here in the U.S.
I mean, I see all the time. I get served these viral Unitree videos that are just incredible. And sure, ours are really great, but when you look at them, you're kind of blown away. How do you close that gap? I mean, when you think about, I just outlined some of it, costs, manufacturing, how does the US catch up? You're living and building in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the benefit of your guests, if it's helpful, we're America's largest AI native industrial robot manufacturer. We've deployed to almost every state of the union in aerospace, oil and gas, automotive, data centers. And what we're seeing on the ground is that there's a need for robots here and that people want to buy American, and that really all of the technology is changing right now. And with AI, you can now show a robot what you want it to do. And we've designed our product for an 18-year-old to be able to train with AI and deploy it. And we're seeing a need for that. And I think that China is not yet leading in that. They're leading in humanoid video hype, but they aren't, and they're leading in supply chain and in hardware, but they aren't leading in creating the products that our factories actually need.
So, I mean, this reminds me a little bit of the open source debate we've been having over the last few weeks. And that is, if you sort of ban the best models, the most capable and the cheapest models in America, you may be putting American companies and American developers at a disadvantage. I know you said that, you know, China's excelling in a specific place, but they have manufacturing. If you can get more robots into factories, if you can kind of accelerate your business with robotics and they're available from China, but you know, the US government says we're not going to let that happen, do you just disadvantage US industry?
Yeah, it's a good question. The reality on the ground right now is that most of our robots come from Europe and Japan. And it's about, outside of standard bots, about 99% of American robots in manufacturing context come from those countries. So we actually aren't using Chinese robots to a large extent yet. What this ban does, the FCC announced this week, it's advanced robots, so it's mobile robots and it's robots with legs. It's basically any robot that moves, and it's only new models, so it grandfathers in existing models. We think that the ban is a good thing. It's going to help us get our supply chain and our robotics off the ground here in the United States, but I don't think it disadvantages American manufacturers at all.
Right. There's this saying we always use when we talk about China, and that is invention is the necessity is the mother of invention. Does that apply, do you think, to the US if we ban, I think what you're saying is mostly humanoid robots, right? The specific class of robots here, does that help the American industry accelerate? We don't have the same things that China has, though. I mean, they have a central government that can put a ton of capital behind that industry. I don't think we're doing the same thing, are we?
Yeah, we're not doing the same thing. And interestingly, if you look at the countries that lead today, which is Japan and China in robotics, they've had national robotic strategies for decades. So they've thought about how do we lead in this space, and what they've done is they've intervened with their central governments. And so the United States doesn't do that, of course. And where we are right now is China is willing to sell robots at less than cost to the United States. We've seen this play out in solar before. I think the government is saying, look, this is a fundamental technology. We need to lead in robotics. It's so important for our country, and that we're going to make sure that we're the leaders for this next stage.
Right. This touches, again, I can't help but thinking about so many of the debates that we're having right now in AI, but the people I talk to seem to talk about sort of like offense versus defense. You can either restrict something or you can innovate. And right now, sort of this move that Washington is doing by restricting, is that the right one? How can we encourage innovation without a central government?
Yeah, it's a good point. I think that we have to do both. And in terms of restricting, you provide a fair playing field. That's all that American companies need, is a fair playing field. In terms of out innovating, that's what we've done as a country for decades. We're a country that created Google and Tesla and SpaceX. And I think that America will rise to the challenge here. And this creates an opening for our countries to be the best on earth in robotics. And that's what we intend to do at Standard Bots. We think that this is good for the entire ecosystem here in the United States to really get this flywheel going, the supply chain and the final products and the factories that are automating.
A moment ago, you said that you're not manufacturing or maybe getting supplies from China yet. Does that mean you're looking at it?
We design almost all the parts in the robot. So the encoder, the motor controller, the inverter, almost everything in there except for chips and bearings. We are doing final assembly today. We're moving to do almost everything, casting on one end where you're bringing blocks of aluminum in, you're melting them down, finished robots going out the end, like Henry Ford style. We have a few parts that come from China. I think we've got some connectors and things like that, but for the most part, our goal is by the end of next year to have a fully made in America arm. We're working towards that. We think it's important. I think the interesting thing is we believe we can do it at a cost competitive price, against anyone in the world by automating. And robotics are the way that we as a country can be competitive again, including in terms of what we sell our robots for.
right? I mean, we've sort of seen this play out in the chip space, right? We outsourced a lot of it overseas, and now we're trying to bring it back home. You say you manufacture in Europe and Japan. Do we need more of that at home? The government is focused on chips. Will they turn their attention to robotics? Are they?
I think so. I mean, the way we think about robots is that this is the next big platform, where basically where we are in robotics is like 1970 for the computer industry. It's very nascent. People don't realize how many robots we're going to need, how they're going to be in every home and business. In 1970, the CEO of IBM said, why would anyone need a personal computer? And it didn't age well, of course. But that's what we expect to see in robotics. They're going to be everywhere. And we, as a country, we've always led these big changes, and we've always been the owner of the next new platform. And I think it's essential if you want to be a world power that you own those things, and that's what we expect to happen here.
Let me push back a little bit, because yes, America is, greatest innovative country in the world, but China's getting pretty good at it. We've seen that. You mentioned solar. We've seen that in electric vehicles. We've now seen that in some places of AI, like open source. So what makes you so confident that we're going to be able to catch up and then take the lead in robotics?
Yeah, I think what China has done, and what you're alluding to, a lot of you are alluding to as physical world things. And the situation on the ground is, and every hardware company in the United States knows this, if you quote parts in China versus the United States, there's a 5 to 10x difference in cost, meaning we just are not competitive in terms of manufacturing today. It costs more to make things here in the United States. And at the same time, as we discussed earlier, China's installing 10 times the number of robots that we are year on year. So they're getting even more competitive every year, despite already being ahead. The way that we can lead for the physical world too is to jumpstart our manufacturing, to revitalize the country. We think robotics are the only way to do that. And when you install robots, you're becoming more productive. You can, one worker can be, they're like the new power tool of the 21st century, where every worker can be so much more productive. And so we think that is how, as a country, we can be competitive again. And that's what we need to do so that we can compete in all these areas.
Right. And I guess what you're saying too is, like, if you supercharge robotics, that will help a lot of other industries as well. Good argument to make. Evan, great to have you. Thanks for coming on. Hope to talk to you again soon, but a great view at sort of what is happening. A lot of debate, a lot of opinions going on in this space. Thank you. Evan Beard, Standard Bot. That's it for the live stream today. Thank you so much for watching. To everyone who tuned in, to everyone on the back end here, Jasmine, Sammy, Robert, Evan, Divya, everyone who makes this happen, thank you. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks.